This is Breaking Down Security, episode 12 for March 14th, 2015. I am Brian Brake. Welcome back, dear listener. I am here by myself. The Breaking Down Security World Headquarters is sans Mr. Boettcher because he visited and was volunteering for Bsides Austin. And I needed some help, so I did my news team assemble, and the people who answered the call was former podcast interviewers, now co-hosts, Jarrod Frates and Lee Brotherston. So welcome, gentlemen, to the podcast.
Howdy.
Hi, thank you.
This week we're going to deviate a little bit from our norm of bringing you a specific topic, and we're going to talk about a little bit of the news of the week. We have Lee on because some of the news that we're going to talk about has to do with him, and we did have some news for Jarrod, but unfortunately it's not official. It's unofficially official, so we can't say anything yet. But keep your ears out on the Twitterverse because I'm sure it will come out very soon. And congratulations in advance, Mr. Jarrod.
Thank you for the congratulations on secret news that can't be talked about.
Exactly. That's right. All hush-hush, super secret squirrel-like stuff. So we've got some news. We're going to talk about RowHammer. We're going to talk about an article on NTP, a Leviathan security report on the lack of hireable talent, and we're going to talk about Moxie Marlinspike's GPG rant on the fact that it sucks and should go and die a slow, horrible death. So, Jarrod, the RowHammer thing, very interesting. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about why RowHammer became such a big deal so quickly.
So, RowHammer, okay, so the best thing that I saw in the last week on Twitter was something along the lines of, haha, you and your puny little software vulnerabilities, we're going after physics exploits from Google, basically pointing at Google, going after that. So basically what RowHammer is if you hammer a cell with a given pattern fast enough, you can affect the memory cells that are next to it. And the further we go technology-wise, I mean, we're crunching down everything.
Yeah,
CPUs and memory. We usually think about CPUs. So every time a new CPU generation comes out, we talk about how it's dropped down into the 22 nanometer or the 14 nanometer or 10 nanometer. We don't think about this so much for memory, but it has happened. I mean, think about this. The chips, the same format DDR chips, roughly, slots in the different locations, but roughly speaking, the same slots that we used to put in 256 and 512 meg chips, we're putting in 4, 8, on occasion even 16 gig. And the chips themselves are not that much bigger, which means everything's getting compressed.
Sure.
So what's happening now is they've basically found a means by which if you put, the way that I understand it is basically if you put a strong enough field in one spot, you can affect the RAM cells that are adjacent to it. And you can flip bits this way. So, for example, and I think the demonstrations that I've seen have all been within Linux. I haven't seen any demonstrations in Windows. Not to say that there aren't any, but I just haven't seen them. Mm-hmm. So you could, for example, flip a permissions bit. There's a ton of information that's pushed up into memory. You flip a permissions bit, and all of a sudden, your random general user has root access. So
that's a bad thing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's an extraordinarily bad thing. And the thing is this is not something that can be fixed necessarily with a software patch, except perhaps for something that every single time a permission is checked, it goes back and it checks the disk. Mm-hmm. And depending on what's going on, for certain programs, this may not be a big deal. But for a busy web server or a busy database server, this could become a huge performance impact. Mm. And even so, with that kind of a trade-off, even if the patches became available, I think it ends up having to become something of an optional thing to install rather than a mandatory thing. I mean, imagine if your database was suddenly slowed down by 30%.
Oh, yeah.
In order to address this. This would be completely unacceptable for a very wide array of environments. And now, I don't know all the details right now. It seems to me that you have to know something extraordinarily specific about the memory locations, the literal physical memory locations for things.
Mm-hmm.
And where they are at any given time, whether they can be swapped out. So there may be some guesswork right now. But we've seen this in the past where things have been based on guesswork, but if you throw enough stuff at it, it works.
Now, it's completely random, though. So if you were trying to, if memory errors or bit flipping was this is a laboratory-based thing, right? Where you need like lasers and huge. This is all theoretical at this point. It was based on a white paper, and then they said, well, it's Halvar Flake and the folks over at Google who are trying to make this happen, and they did actually make it happen. But it's entirely random right now. They can't tear it down to, okay, if we bang on this row of memory, it's going to flip this bit definitely, right? And this only affects DRAM supposedly. And it also affects ECC RAM, but to a lesser degree.
So there's a few things going here. One, the newer your memory, the more likely you are to be affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
Because your memory cells are going to be packed closer together on newer memory. So if you have an older system that's running straight original DDR,
yeah,
I think you're probably relatively safe. As far as the randomness goes, I think that's going to depend heavily on the complexity of the system. So let's say you have a fairly general operating system, and you have a lot of memory movement going on. You don't have programs that are loaded in a very specific order. In those cases, I think it's probably going to be difficult to pin it down, particularly because, so far as I'm aware, and again, I don't know the internal workings deeply enough to know this for certain, but my understanding from what I've read is that there is enough randomness that within a given system, just a randomly selected system, it's difficult to predict what cells are going to be next to each other. But when you get down to the smaller systems, when you get down to the embedded systems, and when we think about embedded systems, we usually think about the Linksys routers or D-Link or Netgear routers that are at home.
Mm-hmm.
And these have fairly fixed layouts. Keep in mind that these fixed layouts also appear in your Cisco routers and your Cisco switches and
True.
Things like that. That they end up having a very fixed layout, and so if those can get mapped out, it might be more likely that those kind of things can get attacked more readily. And those are tricky things to attack anyway, because every time Cisco releases a new build, they basically get a new memory layout.
Yeah.
But this doesn't happen all the time. A lot of people are not aware that ASAs are running on a modified Linux architecture.
Okay.
And there was a vulnerability that came out middle of last year, and I apologize. I'm blanking on the name of the researcher who produced it, but it basically had to do with it was bypassing ASA portal editing permissions, the VPN portal editing permissions, because it was running Linux.
Okay.
And it made it much easier once you understood that it was running Linux to understand how the architecture worked and enable this bypass. Because of that, and because it's very much a shrunk down version, it not only makes it simpler to target, but it may also widen the types of attacks that can be used against it. Because if you can get a Linux program on it, then and be able to execute a RowHammer to get this privilege escalation, then you may be able to run it as root. And of course, running that on your ASA VPN that's pretty much game over.
Yeah. So let me get Lee in here, because Lee is a very awesome gentleman. He doesn't necessarily do pen testing. He does threat assessments and stuff, and he does client engagements. Let's say you've got a client engagement next week, and the CISO of that organization comes in and says, "Hey, how can we, is this RowHammer something we should be worried about, and how would we go about protecting ourselves from this kind of issue? Is there protections that we can add to, to our existing infrastructure to notice or to detect or prevent those kinds of attacks?"
I think detection in the traditional sense is going to be difficult because it doesn't look like a normal exploit. There's no shell code that Snort is going to pick up, most likely. It's not looking for TCP binds or some kind of system hook like that. Mm-hmm. I think you're more likely to get intelligence on it out traditional telemetry, when people are monitoring processor usage and disk usage and all that sort of thing. And there may be other artifacts that are present in the system that you might be able to monitor for as part of server health rather than security check. Mm-hmm. And then you can also get into the realms of how serious a problem it is for them, because problems like this for, say, a military system are very different to the problems that a retailer would have, for example. So because this is a physics-based attack, different vendors of RAM, I believe, are more or less susceptible than each other. So mm-hmm. you can make decisions on what hardware you're running. Obviously, there's a cost associated with that, but if that cost is smaller than your perceived cost of the risk, then it might be something that people want to look at, running particular architecture, running particular vendors of RAM. Because in the original Google paper, there's a table in it, and they've obfuscated the manufacturers. It's model A, B, C, laptop, vendor A, B, C, whatever. Sure. But they've done this table of, for each laptop, they put a different maker of DRAM in it, and they've actually started noting down which ones they did and didn't see the bit flip in. Mm-hmm. So, like Jarrod said, it's early days, and that people could refine this and make it a lot more efficient and make it so that a lot more systems are vulnerable. But the way this reads currently, it looks like there are hardware configurations, that you can run that would make you less susceptible. I don't want to say safe, but less.
Yeah, and so you could, we're going to see do you think Google has already talked privately to those memory manufacturers and said, hey, you need to maybe work on your manufacturing processes to isolate the various, RAM sections against this? Or you think we'll see an upgraded like ECC2 or a DDR5, which won't have this kind of vulnerability? Or do you think we're just destined to have this, issue forever?
I think this is one of those things that there's going to be a certain amount of living with it at a standard level, and I'm sure that at some point someone will come out with the, 10 times the cost but much safer versions. Like you get the $500 Ethernet cables made of gold and whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
the same deal.
I'm going to take a little different viewpoint. I'm going to suggest that it's not going to be an immediate effect, but I think as DDR4, which is, I know you can get it. I was actually looking at the prices on Newegg, and they're really kind of prohibitive right now. But if you want that extra 7% performance, you can go for it. Mm-hmm. But as we get into DDR4 becoming a standard and this becoming more of an issue, and as we start moving into tighter and tighter packing, I think this is going to become a bigger problem. And we're already dealing. One of the things that the CPU engineers have to deal with, and this is at Intel and AMD and anybody else who is dealing with these really with the sub 22 nanometer stuff. Actually, even at the 22 nanometer and even a couple of stages above that, they're dealing with what's called electron tunneling, mm-hmm. which is a quantum physics effect. And we don't really think of this of our computers that are sitting by our desk as being subject to quantum computing, or I'm sorry, to quantum physics effect rather, but they are. And the electron tunneling has been a really serious problem because basically what happens is with an electron tunneling, to keep it very simple, is an electron, even if you have a barrier in there, under certain circumstances, it can basically pop to the other side of the barrier.
Sure.
And it can trip a circuit. And so certain protections have to be put into place. The tighter the circuits, the more likely the electron tunneling is. And so we run into these cases where as things get tighter and tighter packed, we're going to run into these cases. And I think in the next, maybe not in the next couple of years, but maybe in the next 5 years, ECC, which is still largely a server technology, and on very rare occasions is a workstation technology, is going to start becoming a more standard workstation technology. We're going to see it, I think, at the server level. We're going to see it on a more common basis, but I think it's going to start working its way down to the workstation level and eventually down into the notebook level. We're already at the point where it's not a prohibitive overhead. There's a little bit of a performance impact. You do have to. There's an overall memory count impact in that you have to have a certain amount of overhead. I think it's 8 bits for every 64 bits of memory for the ECC. So you have to have a certain amount of overhead. But I mean, think about this: if you were able to get rid of this at a cost of increasing the cost of your RAM by 12%. You know, when I build my systems, and admittedly, I tend to build my systems the last 3 to 4 years. You know, so I'm looking at between $1,500 and $2,000, admittedly, on the high end of things, for most workstations. But the memory is not the hugest portion of that. So if I'm adding $30 or so onto the cost of RAM in order to mitigate this attack, maybe that's worthwhile.
Yeah.
And as more manufacturers start incorporating ECC as a standard part of their memory, I think that numbers are going to start coming down.
Yeah.
And it may end up, it's always going to be an overhead, but it may end up being, instead of $30, maybe it's going to be $5 or $10.
Yeah, I didn't want to think about this, but you know, as we're going more towards cloud-based computing, how would RowHammer affect, you know, say Amazon, if somebody could, you know, bang on a section of code on a you know, or on a section of RAM on a non, say a non-important website like bobstirerepair.com, and if it shares the same, you know, memory row or is adjacent to a memory row to, say, you know, I don't know, you know, fedbank.gov or something like that, and can flip a switch or a bit to make you be able to gain access to a more sensitive website, you know, I think we're going to see those kinds of issues pop up with regard to, I mean, you got to know exactly, you got to know a lot of inside stuff. I would say this is more of a local requirement, because you got to know what's running on those boxes to be able to pop that bit. But it seems to me like that would be something that Amazon would be looking at, or you know, the big cloud providers, with regard to these kinds of memory attacks.
The one thing I would say is that you've got to remember that this is a physics attack, as you mentioned earlier, and
Sure.
cloud providers are virtualized. So what may appear to be adjacent memory rows within a virtualized machine may not be, in actual fact, adjacent memory rows in real physical land. And this is getting into territory I don't know well enough to speak sort of conclusively on, but I would think that some of the assumptions you have to make with this attack might break down if you were inside a virtual host and trying to perform an attack.
Well, yeah, I think especially when you get into memory remapping or memory duplication, which has become a more common part of virtualization as they've tried to improve the memory footprint. If you have an identical page on 3 different systems, if that can be mapped to one segment of memory for those 3 different systems, you've now reduced your memory footprint for that by not quite 2/3, since you have to have the pointer in there. But so I think it introduces a difficulty, but at the same time, I think this is something that those who are familiar with virtualization might have a pretty significant interest in looking at. Joanna Rakowska, I think, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. Joanna, I think, might be somebody to talk to about this, because she knows a great deal about how these kind of things work, about how virtualization works, especially with the memory, and how the remapping works. I think it would be very much a non-trivial attack. Personally, right now I think RowHammer at the moment is a non-trivial attack. But I think as more researchers poke at it and figure out better ways of understanding what's actually in memory, what can be locked in memory, since memory pages, not like pages of text, but memory pages can be locked into RAM and not moved out to swap space. As more techniques come in to map things out, I think we're going to see this becoming an easier attack. Now, keep in mind that some of the attacks that we're seeing right now, an individual attack may have a very low chance of working. So ASLR on a 32-bit platform, I want to say has a 1 in 128 chance of working in most cases.
That's pretty good.
Right. Okay, so an individual attack, if you have one shot at it, your chances are not all that good. They're sub 1%. But if you can just keep going at it, then you've got a pretty decent chance at it. And if you have the ability to map things out, and I'm certain, based on things that I've seen on past attacks, we're going to see more refined versions of the mapping procedures to pin these things down, to figure out where in physical memory things are. I think we're going to see some refinements on this attack, and I mean, even if it's a case where 1 in 1,000 attacks works, we've got 1 billion plus significant systems, not even getting into like mobile devices and stuff. We have 1 billion plus significant systems on the internet. And that raises the chances of it working on some systems to a very significant level.
Yeah. It only takes a little, once it gets weaponized, then that'll be an interesting thing to see. So I think we've hammered RowHammer as much as we want to.
Sure.
Anyway, so I wanted to mess with the order because I want to get Lee on the podcast here. So. Lee helped write a white paper on the lack of hireable people in the IT and information security field for his company, which is Leviathan Sec, and it made a few waves. I remember it coming out and being kind of a big deal. Lee, why don't you explain to our listener about the overview of the paper itself?
Okay. Sure. So it's one of 3 papers. The 3 as a whole were meant to talk about cloud security, and not look at cloud security from the purely technical perspective of average number of vulnerabilities in a cloud provider versus average number of vulnerabilities found in an internal, but the bigger picture. And this formed part of that. Part of it was the availability of security expertise to a normal company, i.e., if you're going to compare using a cloud provider with doing something in-house, you're kind of making the assumption that you can do it in-house. And we were looking at the numbers of, well, can you actually get the people to do it in-house at the minute? Because a lot of people are talking about the lack of people that are hireable. If you go to any conference, so many talks end with, come and speak to me, we're hiring. And so we went and tried to take it from a statistical and qualitative path, not just the anecdotal evidence that we hear of people saying it's really hard to hire people. And so we went away and we looked at the number of companies that are hiring, have open positions, and we looked at the number how that equates. We looked at the US because the US is a large part of our audience and it's a market that a lot of people know, and so we looked at positions in the private sector and in the government and how long they'd been open. And there is a standard at which jobs are deemed to have been unfilled because they have been open for too long. So we looked at that, and then we looked at how many people are on the job market, and then we looked at how many what the shortfall was, and then we looked at how many people coming into the job market. So we looked at things like people being issued visas from outside the US for the purpose of coming into the US to fulfill these positions, people in the US education system that will be graduating and coming into junior roles and coming up the ranks and so forth. and we found that there was an absolutely massive shortfall. Furthermore, not only was there the shortfall, but if you're talking about things like visa programs where people are going to be brought in from abroad, you're causing an even bigger shortfall in other parts of the world. And who's to say that they're not going to up their game and start poaching people back from the US again and so forth. So really, it was a paper designed to talk about that there is this shortfall in security and where do we go and yeah, sort of how do we go from here? We're not really proposing the end game. We don't have a plan together on how you overhaul the education system or anything like that, but it's really a food for thought insofar as how big the problem is and that we should start addressing this, because of course you cannot generate people of a certain proficiency in InfoSec overnight. It doesn't matter how much money you want to throw at it. It takes time to learn the skill. So people need to go and either get experience or education or both. So that's really where it came from. Okay. And then, like I said, that feeds into the larger thing of how people manage security because of the lack of methods.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. What about the other side of it? You've got companies who say we need tech people, but we can't seem to find the tech people. What about the people who are in information security, but they say, well, we can't find a job because there might be an issue with, I don't know, job description. I know that I have looked, when I was looking for a job prior to my job, I would look at job descriptions and it was like, you needed to be everything under the sun. You know, a Unix admin needed to know Windows stuff, or, you know, there's no junior pen test positions out there where it's like, you know, I could go to, I don't know, one of the boutique places, I don't know, Leviathan Sec, I would consider, you know, to be a junior pen tester, you know, where I'm at right now. Yes, Jarrod, the floor recognizes Jarrod Frates.
So there's a few things that are going on here. I think right now we suffer from a problem where there's this, and I hate to kind of sound like I'm getting into the political side of things here, but where we have companies that are looking at a short-term view of things. That they want the security pros that have, you know, 15 years of experience or maybe 10 years of experience, and they've done firewalls and IDS, and they've done pen testing, and they've done coding, and realistically, some of the brightest people that I know in the InfoSec world don't know how to code. Like, I've seen people that, like, I'm like, yay, you know, I bow to you, and they're just like, please don't read my Python code because it sucks. And so the problem that I've seen, and this is from the inside, this is from somebody who's actually interviewed people, is there's this idea that they need to hire people, that business needs to hire people that can hit the ground running and just like keep going. There is, in my experience, I've met a lot of people that know that I can ask them about Nmap, and they can tell me everything about Nmap. And I can ask them about Metasploit, and they can tell me all kinds of things about Metasploit. And actually, I can ask them about firewalls and IDS and DLP and all kinds of technologies, and they can tell me all about them. And then I say, okay, so string them all together, and how do they work together? And they go, okay, well, you put IDS here, and you put firewalls here, and you put DLP here. But that's not really stringing them together. There was one of the highlights of my career, and I've been in IT for 17, 18 years, 19 years, actually 19 years now. So I've been in IT for 19 years now. I've been in security for over a decade. And I honestly consider one of the highlights of my career hiring a young man that when we asked him technical questions, we said, okay, so can you explain the difference between, or can you explain HTTP? He gave us really kind of a cursory view of things. And okay, so great. Can you give us some common ports? And he gave us kind of like what you would expect sort of like a random IT person to give. Port 80 is HTTP and port 443 is HTTPS. Things like that. But when we started asking him scenario questions, so you get an alert from the antivirus system that says the system may have been infected. What do you do? Or things like there's an IDS alert that comes in that suggests that an attack may be underway. He didn't do so well on the technical stuff, but when we asked him the scenario-based questions, he completely blew us away.
Sure.
And I think there's too much of a focus on the technology that can be learned in a few months, even a few weeks in many cases.
Yeah.
Compared to the scenario-based items that, if you give them a chance to sort of give this open answer type of thing, you will find out that some people know how to put these things together, and other people don't know how to put them together.
Yeah.
I am far more interested in the people who know how to put them together and I can teach them, this is what HTTP looks like, this is what SSH looks like, this is how a firewall works, and this is how an IDS works, and this is how they work together. At the end of a few months after hiring him, he was one of the best guys that we had ever brought in. And this is a guy that we had to teach him how to use Wireshark.
Well, yeah, but you taught him how you wanted him to learn Wireshark, not how he had already come in with a preconceived notion of how he does Wireshark.
It wasn't, to a degree, yes, but it wasn't entirely that. It was, we helped him understand how to implement Wireshark into his existing thought processes in how to come into the environment and how to approach the environment. It became another tool for him to properly analyze what was going on.
Sure.
So, and that to me is far more. If somebody can come in and cite chapter and verse every RFC involved, but can't chain them together, they're worthless.
Sure, it's all book learning. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is, within the industry, this is why you see so many people that bang on certain certifications. I'm not going to get into the specific ones, but they bang on certain certifications because they are A, B, C, D, not A plus B plus C plus D.
A little add-on to that, and you may disagree, I don't know, is that not only are employers guilty of putting together these unachievable job specs, applicants are also guilty of not applying for things because they only meet 98% of the things listed in a job spec, and they go, oh, but I can't do whatever item. And they don't realize that employers will get a lot of people that are applying that are going to be below whatever the job spec was, and they could still end up being the top applicant on paper.
Well, you know, I'll tell you, when I was in Austin, I was trying to find several jobs there, and a lot of times the job that you're interviewing for is not going to be the job that that you're getting. Because I'll tell you, it was Austin Power and Energy. That I'm not going to call them out specifically, but this was one that I remember quite well. It was for a security analyst position. So I get up in there, and they're, it's like updating SOPs, doing audits, that kind of thing. And I get up in there, and the first 10 minutes of it was, well, which Linux command will give you the long listing in a directory? And I'm like, well, it's ls-l if you want, file names and all that. And about after the fifth or sixth question, I asked them, I was like, what am I interviewing for? What's the job I'm interviewing for? And they're like, well, all the SOPs and the audit things, we only do those like once or twice a year. So really, you're just going to be doing a lot of Linux administration. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay. I think we're done here. It was an hour-long podcast, interview, and I lasted 30 minutes because I was like, yeah, I don't think I want to be a Unix admin anymore, so I'm good. And there was silence on the other side of the line. They were like, you're turning us down? It was like, and I was like, yeah, it's not you, it's me. But I couldn't even tell them that. So, and 98% of the job, because if I don't know Oracle, I'm not probably going to apply for the job, because it should be like an ingredients list. It should be like the thing you're going to do the most is at the top of the list, and it's like other duties is assigned at the bottom. If Oracle is at the very bottom, then I should expect to have to deal with Oracle, or Ruby or Python, or I don't know, document destruction or hard drive destruction, maybe 2 or 3% of the time, and penetration testing and running Nexpos and all this stuff should be at the very top, because I'm going to be doing it 80 to 90% of the time. But you don't get that. You get you get the HR guy who's putting a bunch of buzzwords in, and then you get the whole buzzword bingo on your resume, and you got to make sure that all the stuff's in there. But I mean,
the whole hiring process as a whole needs an overhaul, really.
Well, the information security field is kind of different in that respect, because a lot of it is not who you know, or it's not what you know, it's who you know, because we have security conventions, and like you mentioned, Lee, where people give talks and they go, oh yeah, let me know, we're hiring. Well, yeah. A lot of these people, the vast majority of people in information security, don't go to conventions, they don't give talks, they don't go to these things with the idea that they could find a job, or they don't, they're not on social media, they're not on Twitter, they're not on something, and they're in the same job for 15 to 16 years, thinking they're going to get that gold watch, and really happy with where they're at. And I think it's, I don't know if it's something where we need to begin trade schools. I don't know if would information security be considered a trade, like a plumber or something, where we could stand up and have more education in that respect than say a college, because I know a lot of information security folks don't have a traditional college degree. They're self-taught, or they've learned under somebody, or they've gone to prison because they hacked something and then got out and started their own companies. What do you think on an educational front that we should look at? Should we have companies put up a junior pen tester or junior security analyst that or have a probationary security analyst moving into a more temporary or a permanent position?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked at places that have had junior analyst roles, and they've come on, like Jarrod was saying, about having people with the right attitude and mindset rather than technology background. Mm-hmm. I had a similar case, and they were awesome. I think something like that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think it's a lot more than, not necessarily you having the technical skill, being a rock star or whatever, but you have to be able to work in the culture. There's a lot of unknowns with a person. If you come in and you can tell during the interview or during just having a talk with them that, maybe they're not the right person to be in the culture of the company. If they're willing to learn and, they fit, they're a good cultural fit, then, a lot of what they're doing right now, if they're willing to learn, then they should be able to get on and do whatever's necessary to fulfill the role that you want them in, and they should be able to fill almost any role, I would imagine. So.
Well, I think getting to the education point from a technical level, look, I don't have kids yet. I'm hoping to have kids at some point, and if they come to me and they say, hey, I want to go to technical school for welding, or they want to do technical school for carpentry or something along those lines. Look, if it makes them happy, fine. That's what I want. I want happy kids.
Well, welders make some pretty damn decent money. I mean,
so I heard from somebody that I know that works at a space-involved company in Central Texas that
way to narrow it down there.
that they have basically co-opted the welding industry for a significant distance surrounding the city that they're involved in.
Wow.
To the point that, like, if you want, like, a trailer hitch welded, there's a little bit of a waiting list involved.
Really?
So, yeah, I mean, people don't think about this, that, when somebody's building a launch site, mm-hmm. welders are involved in that.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's not just this little simple jobs. This is welders actually get involved into real engineering stuff. But I think we've had, over the last decade, we've had computing become a more prominent part of just general education. So we don't learn typing on typewriters anymore. We learn typing on computers.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school in the late 80s, early 90s, we had some computing courses, but they tend to be very basic things, like learning how to program in Pascal, things like that.
Oh,
but since then, we've had some things on more on general computing things, how to learn to use office suites,
mm-hmm.
And more commonly, we're seeing things that are along the lines of how to keep secure on the internet.
Sure.
And I think it's going to lag behind the industry needs for a significant period of time, and maybe even forever. But we're going to see these things that are not just how to be secure on the internet, but how to just be secure, where students in high school are going to be learning the concepts of firewalls. They're going to be learning the concepts of encryption, of malicious code,
mm-hmm.
and not enough to allow them to necessarily undertake attacks, but they're going to be necessary for preparation into getting into a modern environment. Sure. We're in a situation right now. I mentioned earlier that I've been in IT for 19 years, in some form or another. When I started, I was doing desktop support, basically. And when I started, if we had 100 endpoints to one desktop support person, that was a pretty significant load. And I know people now that are like 500 and 600 endpoints to one person. And that's...
The users have gotten smarter.
Well, it's not even that the users have gotten smarter. It's just that things have gotten far more automated. They don't have to manually roll out patches. If they're doing endpoint support, they're doing it remotely.
Okay.
Things that I would have, given my little toe for on the left foot to be able to do, because, doing remote support to Chicago in, 1998 was a royal pain. And now it's just, okay, well, I'm going to pop open a window and see what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's that, and the operating systems have gotten dramatically simpler. But the security field, on the other hand, has gotten dramatically more complex. And I don't see it getting any simpler in the next, at least in the next decade. I think it's going to get more complex in the next decade.
Has information security gotten more complex because the OSs have gotten simpler on the front end for the user, and it's so much more complex on the back? Like we've got the Wizard of Oz thing where you've got everything going on behind the scenes.
No, it's gotten more complex because we have more computers.
Okay.
So when I got started in things, the networks were all flat. They were very simple. The most complex network that I was involved in when I got started had 2 subnets. And that was considered to be a fairly complex network. Within a couple of years, I was working at a place that we were a multinational company, but even then we had, 25 subnets across the entire company. By the time I got to the position where I was actually working in security, I was in an environment of 18,000 users in one metropolitan area. And we had 35, 40 subnets. Firewalled from each other, complex interconnection plans, firewalls in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect them. And when I get in and I start doing pen testing on environments now, they are just as complex, but over a much larger area and over a much larger number of endpoints. And I don't see it getting any easier. As a matter of fact, with IPv6, it's going to get even more complex.
Yeah.
Over the next few years, and until we get to the point, and I've mentioned this to you before, Brian, I don't view computer science as a science. I view it as an art. There's far too much.
Oh, easy, buddy. Easy. Goodness. Wow. Easy.
So there is far too much of what happens if we do this for it to really be a science. We don't know enough of it. We are at the point really of working with colors. Because at the very least for that, we have chemistry, and to a certain extent biology understanding. For computing systems, we are so far away from understanding all the possible interactions that it is far more an art than a science.
Easy computer day guy. I don't. Okay, buddy. Yeah. So do you see that the same way, Lee, where it's getting more complex when you're doing assessments? Like you've got a bunch of systems cobbled together to try to,
It's definitely more complex, where we're getting more and more possibilities of variations of what you can see in terms of software and hardware all the time. It's not coming together into a single unified platform by any means. Mm-hmm. And I think, was it this year or the year before when Dan Gear did did one of the keynotes at Black Hat? Mm-hmm. He made the point that there was a point in information security when there was the concept that a person could have a handle on the entire topic of information security near enough, and we are way past that now. We are not at a point where a person can sit and know InfoSec.
We're 15 years beyond that, I think.
Yeah, we're at you learn your niche, you can deep dive your niche or your sub niche or whatever, but yeah, it's an ever expanding field and it's increasingly hard to keep up.
Okay. So before we leave this, that we kind of got off here a little bit on the hireable people. For the folks who are wanting to get into information security or in information technology right now and trying to figure out how to get into information security, because I understand it's a $10 to $15 billion a year industry and it's only getting bigger, and they see the job description on somebody's website and they think, hey, I can do all of the, I can't do that part. Do you believe that, they should, I don't know, round out their resume in some way as to make themselves more hireable, or do they need to start doing more networking, or do you think the HR method is still the best way to go ahead and get that job?
I'm going to quote a wise but completely insane man.
So yourself, you're going to quote yourself then?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm quoting Larry Pesce on this particular one.
Oh, okay.
And I say that only because it's completely public words.
Oh, Larry Pesce. Oh.
I'm not quite to that point.
Oh, okay.
Because reasons.
Kiss
I'm going to say, tempt the fates. I'm sorry. Bits are cheap. Tempt the fates.
Bits are cheap. Tempt the fates. Okay.
Yes. Now that said, please polish your resumes, and please do not send us 32-page resumes.
Oh. Okay.
Spend a little bit of money. Spend a little bit of money on cleaning up your resume. It's in general, it's very much worth it. There are some places that are more expensive than others, but I think in many cases it's worth it. But even if you don't spend the money on it, spend time on it. But that said, it doesn't hurt you to send something in. Honestly, if you send me a resume right now, and I read it and I go, you know what, this person's not going to work, and I read your resume again 9 months from now, I am going to have no clue that I read your resume 9 months before, because I read 70 resumes before. Right. I don't know your name from anybody else.
Mm.
Plus,
okay,
you don't know what the other candidates are like. If they've got a shopping list of 80 items or something ridiculous like that, and you have 78 of those, you don't know that everyone else that applied didn't just have 70. You could still be the top candidate and not tick all the boxes.
Nice thought. Okay, yeah. So try for that job, even if you think you don't, qualify.
Yeah.
Because strange things can happen.
Well, a lot of companies. I'm not saying they will hire a subpar person, but a lot of companies, this has gone through several stages. Remember, it'll have like the hiring manager, and then HR are throwing their bit on top, and maybe the hiring manager's boss has thrown a bit in, and the list has grown to be like their special unicorn perfect candidate, and that's not going to walk through the door. So you just need to be, you need to be good enough. You don't have to be it necessarily.
Yeah.
And you never know what the perfect candidate is. I mean, the gateway certifications change all the time. CCNA was a gateway certification at one point. Then it was MCSC. Then it was CISSP.
Don't be dogging on my CISSP. That got me a lot of places.
It does. I'm not knocking. But the point is that any given place is not necessarily going to have the same, and you don't know. Even if a place says you must have a 4-year degree in computer science, throw your resume anyway. Okay, best advice that I ever got was not even given directly to me. It was from George Clooney, You can go back and check him out on in the Actors Studio. And there was a question that came up about basically it was like how to approach auditions. And he said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing part of this, but he said actors get in their own way a lot when it comes to auditions. They go in thinking, oh, I hope I'm great for this, or I hope I'm the right one for this role. And they don't realize that on the other side, the director's going, I hope this next person is the right one for this role. But he pointed out, he said, when you go in for an audition, you're gambling with house money. From the moment that you walk in, you don't have the job, to the moment you walk out, you don't have the job. Nothing has changed. The only thing that can possibly change is that you get the job. Period. And if you keep that in mind, it will take all the stress and all the weight off of your shoulder, and you will do much better.
Nice. That's excellent. Okay. So yeah, throw it out there, see what sticks. Just like on The Odd Couple, you got to throw it up against the wall, see if it sticks. Yep. So yeah, that's great advice, especially from people who have definitely hired people before, which is, hey, by the way, if we're asking, is Leviathan Sector, hiring right now, or,
You know what? I haven't actually looked. I have no idea if we have posts, but like you always say, send the resume, take a look.
That's right. LeviathanSec.com. I don't know what Jarrod's is yet because he's not official. He's officially unofficial. So,
honestly, I expect Xerox will be hiring soon. Xerox Business Services specifically.
Xerox Business Services. Yeah, they're a quality group. That's how I got to know Jarrod through pen tests for the company I used to work for. So, all right, so that was great. I actually didn't expect it to go that far, but that's awesome. I'm glad we got to go down that road with the hireability because it makes me even feel better about looking at things. So our last couple of news articles are inexplicably connected in many ways. Number 3, the NTP being maintained by one guy. This is not the first time we've heard this. When the OpenSSL, all the vulnerabilities last year, Heartbleed, Beast, Crime, all of those came out, it was found that pretty much it was one guy doing the maintainership of critical, I would say almost critical internet infrastructure, say OpenSSL. And now we find out the last couple of days that NTP is being really maintained by one guy. And it's to the point where he's actually actively looking for another job, and he's wondering if he even has time to maintain NTP. What's his name? It is his name. Dang it. I had it right there. Sten. Last name is Sten. Where the heck is his? Harlan Sten.
Harlan.
There it is.
Yeah,
Harlan. He lives in Talent, Oregon. And the picture on Information Week has got him in his lab there, and he's been maintaining, the server with his own personal finances, and for the last 3.5 years he's worked 100+ hours a week, answering emails, patches, and rewriting patches, and now he kind of needs a job. And I think, I don't know if it's indicative of the industry, but it's one of those super important things. NTP. I mean, every compliance framework requires you to have, proper time server functionality. NTP over the last years has been seen to be used as an attack vector in the amplification attacks for DDoSing things. It's one of those things that's just kind of there, and we took it for granted for a long time that it was going to be there forever, and it's not being maintained properly. I mean, when was it hasn't had a decent code audit, and there's just this poor bastard who's poor guy who's having to maintain it with those personal finances.
And we've got to remember as well, NTP, it's not just attacks against the server in terms of a vulnerability that could lead to, a compromise of an NTP box. If you mess with time, as in mess with what machines think the time is, there are massive implications. So many two-factor authentication mechanisms have time as a factor, and if you can alter the time they think it is, you can roll back to previous two-factor authentication codes or forwards or whatever, not just locking people out, but potentially using credentials that should have expired and things like that. So I think that it's twofold. There's vulnerabilities that let you attack boxes running NTP, but there's also just this fact of the trustworthiness of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, and this one also gets the general topic of one person maintaining something gets interesting, because no matter how this works out for his personal funding, it still doesn't actually protect us from the proverbial steps out in front of a bus, gets run over, oh no, he's gone scenario.
Oh yeah, exactly. So I mean, what's the answer here? I mean, we can't just have one guy doing it. Should there be I don't know. They have wget being maintained by pretty much the GNU group. Would turning something over to them be, turning it over to a community period and just saying, okay, GNU, you maintain NTP. Is that the way it should go with this guy? I mean, it seems like he likes doing it. It's just he's arguably 60 years old, and he's hard up and looking for a better job because he's tired of working 100-hour weeks. I know I would be.
There's a concern that I have about his age. And look, NTP is one of those protocols that everybody uses.
Oh yeah.
Even Microsoft uses it.
Well, yeah.
And at that point, we have somebody who's 59 years old, and at that point, once you hit, I would argue that once you hit 50, if you were a sole maintainer of a project, that becomes an extremely significant risk, because your risk, your mortality risk starts climbing well above 1% on a regular basis every year. I applaud him for his dedication.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could dedicate 100 hours a week to anything.
I'd love to have him on the podcast.
Oh, that would be fantastic. I would love to find out some of the esoteric things that he's working on. The corner cases that aren't just, hey, I found this thing, and if you do this thing, and this thing, and this thing, then you might result in this.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's got a lot of cases that have actually affected live environments that, hey, we ran into this, and it broke this really critical system. I think that would be an absolutely fantastic discussion.
Yeah.
But I think we're getting to the point where we need to take a very close look at the technologies that are underlying our everyday activities and view how many people are actually behind it. Do we need to get a working group behind it? I would argue, given the attacks against, not attacks against NTP, but the attacks using NTP, I would argue that we need to start working on maybe a way to transition this off of UDP into TCP.
Well, you can use it in TCP, except there's a lot of extra overhead. I know we tried that where I used to work, trying to run, TCP NTP, but it was a lot of extra overhead.
But how much overhead is it compared to the overall traffic level? And are there ways of improving them? So there's the existing TCP overhead, but I don't think anybody's taken a really solid look at it, because, like many other protocols, we have taken NTP for granted. We've taken, on top of NTP, we've taken DNS for granted. Even DNSSEC has its own issues. We've taken SMTP for granted. For a long time, we took HTTP for granted. Even HTTP2 has its problems that are hopefully being mitigated largely because the clients are not accepting those limitations. But how many other protocols do we have that have problems in them? And how many people are actually working on these things? You mentioned earlier when Heartbleed came out that OpenSSL suddenly got an infusion of cache, a much-needed infusion of cache. GPG got a much-needed infusion of cache. It was relying on one, maybe two people, one primary person and maybe two people working part-time on it. But even on top of GPG, there are the other programs. There's WinGPG. GPG Win is the proper name.
Yep.
That there's a couple of people that are working on that, but they work on it largely on their own time with a little bit of money from the German government, I think. But it's not a lot. When I tried to install it on my system, when I rebuilt it using Windows 8, I was like, cool, I'm going to install this stuff. And there were bugs. And I'm happy to say that I was one of those who was just like, hey, I ran into this, and, great, I can test this beta, and okay, great, it worked, cool. But realistically, it comes down to one person working on GPG, a couple of people working on WinGPG. We've got one person working on NTP. We've got DNS that has been largely stagnant. HTTP, which has moved forward for the first time in 10, actually, I think it's closer to 15 years.
Yeah.
So, I think we're long overdue for a review of all the protocols that we're using on a widespread basis, and looking at the support for all of those protocols and figuring out who's chipping in and who should be chipping in.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I don't like to use names, but it rhymes with Snoogle and with Picrotoff. Those rhyming words there. The big companies should be. They don't give enough money to things that underpin their own infrastructure that they think that they're immune to. So I hear, I'm on the OpenBSD mailing list, and I see a lot of OpenSSH stuff where they were having issues.
The original SSH came about as the result of I think it was one person who kind of realized that Telnet was really kind of a bad way of doing things.
Sure.
Telnet and other things, our login and so
well,
forth.
it was Tattoo Yalonen who created the original SSH.com implementation, and then it was restrictive license. So the BSD folks at the time spawned off Open SSH in this case, from what I remember.
Right. So, but even on top of that, there were realizations that this was not the best way of doing things, that there were problems with it, and so we have SSH v2, but even with that, there's stagnation that is involved. I went in recently on my own personal server, and I found some stuff that was like, hey, you should do SSH this way. So I was like, great, I'm going to do SSH this way. Put it in. And then I couldn't connect via SSH anymore.
Yeah.
And part of it is I expect that part of it is a certain amount of paranoia because I run CentOS, so it feeds off of Red Hat stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There have been issues within the Red Hat environment regarding patent encumbrance for certain crypto functions,
Sure.
particularly ECC, which they have finally gotten past, fortunately.
ECC is elliptic curve cryptography.
Right. But a lot of the more modern implementations of SSH have not made it in, at least as of RHEL 6 or CentOS 6. I'm hoping they'll be in 7,
Yeah.
but for various reasons, I can't upgrade till 7 until probably summer.
Oh yeah.
But even then, it's a question mark. So I think we're running into a case where we're taking too many protocols for granted. We're not moving them along as quickly as we can, and the research is overtaking the current status of these protocols.
Sure. Yep. So yeah, I'd love to actually have this gentleman on, because he's literally 3 hours down the road from me. I don't know what we would talk about. Probably in TP, but I'm not. It's one of those things where, I was at ISSA Puget Sound's meeting, and Paul Vixie, one of the fathers of the internets, came to talk on DNS, and I'm like, it's DNS. What's the deal? Port 53 UDP, port 53 TCP, doing zone transfer, yada yada yada. It's huge, and I had no idea. And what I think people don't realize with NTP is how incredibly complex it actually all is once you I hate to use that the thing, but when you pull back the curtain and you see what's going on underneath, it's just a maelstrom of all kinds of jumbled together things left over from the 1970s that we've added on and added pieces to, and complexity and now it's being ran by one guy who I hope has a password to his CVS or SVN or GitHub or whatever it is he's using to maintain the code these days, because like you said, Jarrod, if God forbid something happens to him, we don't have the code. Or if we do have the code, then it's it's probably not an easy to get to place.
Well, I ran into a situation a long time ago where I actually had to dig into the internals of NTP. And I came out of it with what is, for me, one of the highest compliments that I can pay to any implementation, which is that it is elegant.
Oh.
And it makes a great deal of sense when you look at it at a high level. There are some things down at the very low levels that didn't make a lot of sense to me, but at the same time, I didn't know all the nuances to it.
Okay.
But the surface of things for how NTP works is extremely elegant. The fact that it relies on UDP to a degree adds to its elegance, at the same time that it kind of subtracts from it because it's become an attack vector.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he's putting in 100 hours a week on this on a regular basis
for like 3 years.
Yeah, for 3 years, suggests that there are issues that need to be resolved not by him, but by a working group.
Yeah, by
this
a team
is something that needs to be re-raised and turned into a new RFC.
Yeah.
We've done it with HTTP. If we can do it with HTTP, we can do it with NTP.
Yeah, the problem is, though, the new version of HTTP, much like HTML, everything's done by committee. You put somebody from a company on there with an axe to grind or with an agenda, and you're going to have all kinds of issues. I mean, HTML5 became a hodgepodge of, well, I want to put, these little bit, isms that will work for my little platform or whatever. NTP and DNS and all of those were created back in the day where, it was all, I don't want to say free love, but, it was, everybody was there for the betterment of not their company, but for mankind in general. And we're not going to have that in NTP v2 or whatever
they
turn it into.
But for the mess that HTML5 is, and I will grant that it's a mess, as complex as that is, NTP is not nearly the problem that HTML5 is. It is not nearly even the problem that HTTP2 is. It is, at its surface, it's a very elegant protocol. It's relatively simple. I think it needs some fine-tuning. I think it needs a few more musts instead of mays or shoulds.
Or shalls.
Or shalls. I think
and definitely some encryption, because it seems like NTP doesn't have any kind of encryption whatsoever.
Oh, yes. I'm not going to go as far as encryption. Signing, though.
Signing? Okay.
Signing, I think, would not be computationally intensive.
Yeah.
But would add something to it. And with that, I think it would be a substantial improvement. But I think a working group could attack that. I think in under a year, we could probably get an NTP v5. It would be the current version. It would be a new version.
Well, there are NTP implementations out there. I know that the OpenBSD group created OpenNTPD, which they were using to try to make it more secure, because they noticed that there were some issues. Might be interesting to have those guys on if I could. I got so many podcasts in my head I want to do, but I never have the time to do it. Lee, how do you feel about the whole NTP issue?
I'm trying to think how best to manage it. I mean, at the end of the day, really, NTP is a protocol as well as this particular daemon. So there's nothing to say that, like you were saying before with SSH and everything else, that someone else can't do their own implementation of that. And sorry to go off on a tangent, but whilst you were talking, I was just looking at on the Bugzilla page for NTP,
Yeah.
To give you an idea, the current number, as it stands today, he's got 445 bugs open, which is not tiny.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's going to grow every time someone submits something. So, yes, there's obviously an amount of work there as it is without anything new being found. So yeah, I think opening it up to a group is definitely a useful way to go. I have no experience of how one does that, because it's not just a case of you throwing out there. There has to be someone to catch it too and take that on. Because I think if people were to look after it, then if it's just a case of throwing, then put it up on GitHub and wait for the patches to roll in. But I don't think that happens on its own. I think you've kind of got to have someone sort of take that and own that. Like with OpenSSL, like we saw, there was the money injection into that, and then there was the Libra SSL effort and all the different other things we've got on or whatever the Google one was, Boring SSL or whatever it was. So yeah, I honestly, I don't know whether it's best to get a group on this or to fork off into various implementations or what. But I feel for the guy. That's a lot of work to be putting in on a volunteer project.
Yeah.
Well, and we don't want to fall afoul of XKCD 927 regarding standards proliferation.
Yes. That one's very good. I will have to now put that in the show notes. Thank you, Jarrod, for that. I have it bookmarked. It's okay. So, yeah, so I'm gonna leave that one right where it is, because I'm really, really wanting to have that guy on now. I really want to, only because even if we only have him on for 15 minutes, it'd be just cool to have the father of one of the, well, he may not be the father. I don't know if he created or if he just became the maintainer. I didn't actually see anywhere in the article where he was saying he wanted help. I think it was just brought to the attention of somebody that, yeah, he's really the only guy doing it. And everybody's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. I didn't see anything on there saying that he was really wanting help. So he may like being the orchestrator, the conductor of, one of the cornerstones of the internet. So
I suspect, having had the guy that was the sole maintainer of GPG, this was sort of a logical next person to find, another similar story. Yeah,
that's a good segue, because our last news article, because we're extremely over time, but that's fine. I don't care. Moxie Marlinspike works for Google, I believe. You might have heard of that company. It's a little mom and pop search engine. He put out a rant on GPG and PGP, and we had talked about during the NTP segment about there only being one maintainer for the GPG, which is the free implementation of the PGP standard. They both interoperably work now after I think GPG version 2 came out. They became interoperable with one another. But his whole idea of the GPG was that it needs to go away and that it failed. Is that the gist that I'm getting from reading his blog/rant, Jarrod?
So, okay, minor correction. First of all, Moxie heads up Open Whisper nowadays.
Oh, he used to work for Google at one time?
No, he used to work for Twitter.
Oh, that's right. It was one of those companies. God,
right. So one of those random little companies on the internet.
One of them.
They're so hard to keep track of these days.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so Moxie's point was not, and I saw a few articles along these lines that lambasted Moxie. They basically said that Moxie was saying GPG sucks. He was not saying anything of the sort. The problem that GPG has, and I wholeheartedly agree with it, is that by going after absolute cryptography perfection, that GPG has failed in that it has become too difficult to use. If we look at the encryption that we use on a regular basis, we have what would at an upper level be viewed as an enormous number of flaws. When you sign in through SSH to a given system, so if I give you credentials to connect to my systems, and I say, okay, so log in, and here's your username and password, and when you need to log in, or when you log in, you need to change the password. Great. When you go to SSH to it, it's going to give you a key ID. odds are you're going to say, yes, I'm going to accept this. Because you're going to presume that you are not being intercepted. Now, later down the line, if something comes up and says, if it pops up and says, hey, the key has changed, then you might contact me via other means and say, so what's going on? But by and large, you're just going to accept that first key.
Sure.
Within HTTPS, we accept that when we get a green lock or a green URL bar, whatever that the case happens to be, that we have a secure connection. We don't question that really, even though the Superfish and similar situations that have come up recently have attacked that architecture. We don't really question it all that much. The reason why, and I think this is what Moxie was getting at, and I wrote something very similar, is that it's good enough. Mm-hmm. We can build on it. We can improve it. We can find the flaws in it, flag them, and take them out. But the reason that it works for billions of people across the country, across the world rather, is that it works well enough. GPG, unfortunately, does not work well enough for general purpose usage. If I were to go to my parents, who are in their late 50s, early 60s, and say, hey, I'm going to give you GPG Win, or GPG for Win, and here's how it works, and you need to do these things, and I'm going to give you some numbers to work with, and you need to do all these things, and you protect your keys this way, and when you send me email, you need to use these clients because they support these extensions, and then when you send it to me, you need to make sure you send it to this address. This is a long string of complexities for people, and it's not even necessarily my parents. My brothers, who are younger than me, if I threw this stuff at them, they'd be kind of like, no, I'm just going to send you a text, or I'm going to send you an email.
Yeah.
If you look at the kind of things that Moxie's been targeting with Open Whisper, he is going for not perfection, he's going for good enough. And GPG, in going for perfection, has failed because it hasn't enabled a critical mass. And in that failure, according to Moxie, we have the opportunity to grow something that is more successful. When you have something that grows out to a giant scale and is a failure, it becomes a problem. If you have something that's very small that's become a failure, then you can replace it far more easily. And I think I'm on the same page as Moxie by saying we need something that is not only implements good crypto, and it's not a matter of what is good crypto. The end user doesn't care. They need something that says that it's good crypto. So Chrome, for example, right now, if you connect to something that's sub 128 bit for the symmetric key, it's going to flag it. Mm-hmm. Simultaneously, for the asymmetric key, that's the very beginning of your SSL connection, if it's sub 2048, it's going to flag it. But it's also going to flag it if it's SHA-1 or less. This is a moving target, mm-hmm. and it can move rapidly depending on what's going on. So we need something that says, okay, the GPG key that is 2048 and MD5 or SHA-1 isn't good enough, so we're going to automatically regenerate to 2048 or maybe 3072 even, and SHA-256 or 3D4, maybe SHA-3. Mm-hmm. And we need something that's going to keep the stuff, and it's going to be relatively transparent to the end users. Advanced users should still be able to get in and go after things that are important to them, but the general users should not have to worry about this. Unfortunately, under GPG, they do have to worry about this, and that has created a giant barrier to adoption.
Yeah. So Lee, let me ask you a question. When you're doing client engagements, how do you send communications to clients? If they need to send you information or you need to send them information, do you have to deal with that on a regular basis, or how do you get around it if they don't use GPG, or do you use GPG at all?
We do. You know what? We make it client specific. So I have an S-MIME certificate. I have a GPG key. If they use either of those systems, then we can use that. If the client has secure file transfer mechanisms, some people use cloud file sharing. Some people have their own SharePoint servers, whatever. So we tend to fit in with what they use. Partly from exactly what Jarrod's saying, it's not necessarily having to find the best, it's finding one that is good enough for them and usable by them. Because using something that's, maybe 90%, but using it correctly is probably going to work better than something that's, a higher security, but much more complicated to use. There's actually scope to make that less secure through the complexity and difficulty of using it. So we use them. But yeah, I mean, I always offer the GPG stuff, but like we were just saying, not everyone uses GPG, not everyone can use GPG. So it's not always the case.
So Moxie says good enough. Jarrod says good enough. But what is good enough? I mean, is that the 80-20 rule for 80% of the population? Silent whisper, or whatever the hell it's called, whisper systems or whatever. Is it going to be good enough? And then the nuclear option is like using S-MIME or GPG? Or, we talked about this with a couple of months ago. Is like, I still use TrueCrypt because for me, it depends on who you're trying to protect your data from. If I'm trying to protect it against the guy down the street who might take my laptop and go and re-image it or whatever, TrueCrypt's good. But if I'm worried about the NSA owning my ass, or wanting the information, TrueCrypt may not be what, according to the ex-developer, may not be good enough.
Yeah. It's all down to, I think, your own personal level of being able to use the tool. And like you said, it's what your model is against what you're protecting against. Because stopping your wife finding out her birthday present and stopping the NSA are two very, very different models.
Different levels.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And like Jarrod was saying, that's great debate among us, but people that use, use computers as a commodity communications tool, and they're not IT people or security people, they're not going to care beyond does it light up the big green checkbox that says working properly? They don't. Yeah. They're not going to look beyond that. So I think the interface and good enough is good enough.
Yeah. And I want to play the I'm going to be a dick card here. Moxie is working for a company that is trying to create something as a direct competitor to PGP, or GPG. So isn't he trying to poo-poo on an existing product because his is going to be better or is better?
I don't think he's going for something that competes directly with GPG, though. He's going for something that is... I mean, the large part of his products include more or less instant communications. He's not securing large-scale file transfers. He's not securing email, things like that. He's going for something that is, for most people, good enough.
Okay.
I do understand the perspective that maybe there's a little bit of a conflict of interest here, but at the same time, how many people are really running GPG? I mean, I have GPG for Win installed on my main system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have GNU PG on my my MacBook here.
Yeah, I don't have keys for most of my email addresses. I don't even have a key for my primary email address. Mm-hmm. The primary reason being, and this is the giant catch right now. The primary reason being that implementing GPG for a web-based email system is a gigantic pain in the neck right now.
Yeah, I know Google. I know Google was trying to do something where it was trying to implement end-to-end email, but from what I did, and I did a video on how to set up PGP and GPG. I don't know, about 4, 5, 6 months ago. What I learned was it will encrypt the contents of the email, but the metadata is still not encrypted in any way. So even if the bad guy or the good guys, I don't know how government agencies are good or bad. Even if they can't read the message, they know that I've communicated with you, Jarrod, or you, Lee. It doesn't necessarily, they don't necessarily need to know what the content of the message was. You just need to know that I've communicated with both of you. So does Whisper Systems do anything about the metadata portion of that?
I don't know enough about how Whisper Systems does things. I believe they have some means of obscuring that. But within SMTP, the way that the architecture is right now, there's nothing that you can really do to block that metadata. So so if somebody were looking at it, it would show that I was sending an email to Brian and Lee, but they wouldn't necessarily know what it was about. And I'm one of those who doesn't believe they have cracked AES, for example. Because if that were the case, I really don't believe that it would be within the NSA-approved algorithms, and I forget whether it's under the Class A or Class B algorithms, but it's under one of those. Because a vast majority of the government uses AES. So on that basis, and from the handful of people that I know that work for TLAs, I think it's probably secure. In all likelihood, it is very secure. And the more you ramp things up, if you're really paranoid, you can go to 256, AES 256. But there's metadata that you're not going to get away from. And even if you have a case where the to and from and the other headers are obfuscated, at some point it has to go from point A to point B.
Sure.
And that can be viewed. Yeah. And so a careful analysis may not give a 100% guarantee of it's going from Brian to Lee, but there could be good odds based on that you were seen on Skype at that time, you were present at that time, and there was an email that ran from server to server and so forth. So I mean, there's all kinds of analysis that can be done on that level, but the bar that needs to be raised is not that of perfect encryption. It's of encryption in general, because even if the NSA is measuring their computing power in acres, those acres need to be generated or need to be dedicated towards attacking the encryption. Yeah. And if we can get to from point of beyond whatever TLS encryption may be happening between SMTP servers, that it's going from a 1 or 2% encrypted message content to even a relatively low level, a 15 or 20%. And even if we can push it higher, every little bit after that we can push it, reduces the chances of somebody pulling in detailed information about what's going from point A to point B.
So you think it's just a user? You think there's more to it than just user experience? If we could find some way to clean up the UI, or, hey, freaking Clippy, I don't know. Hey, we've noticed you'd like to send an email encrypted. Would you like to, know how to do that? Do you think changing the user experience would make a difference?
As much as I hate Clippy, yes.
Have Locky maybe like a lock that moves?
Yes, Locky pops up and says, "Hey, I noticed you're sending a social security number via email. Would you like to encrypt this?"
I have incorporated to a DLP solution or something. Yeah.
I have looked up the the public key for your destination address. Would you like to encrypt it to this?
Yeah. Very nice. Very
nice. It's not even far away. I mean, there are clients that already do the I see you use the word attachment in the body of your email and there's no attachment.
Yeah.
But those are expensive.
Right.
Yeah, DLP ain't cheap. Yeah.
And we honestly, the best thing that could possibly happen, and it is absolutely not without precedent, the best thing that could happen would be for Microsoft to adopt an encryption protocol. GPG would be, I think, close to the ideal, although I've argued that on my page that there are some changes that potentially need to be made to make it a little easier to use. But if they were to put something together with a relatively secure cloud storage mechanism that could be easily revoked and deleted with with a high degree of assuredness. If that happened, you would suddenly get a rollout of encrypted email to 90% of the world's computer users, and we would see a rapid uptake in this, in encrypted email.
Well, it's not just the fact that it's user, it's the repudiation or non-repudiation as well. I mean, I could create a PGP key with, Mr. Boettcher on it. And, I got into keybase.io recently, as a way of verifying who I was, which was great until I lost my key due to a password locker mess up. But it was an alternate method of verifying who you were to prove that your PGP is actually who you say you are. Do you think that we have issues with identity as well as user interface issues? Because anybody could be anybody basically with any PGP key, right?
I'm sure I'm going to get punched in the face at some time for saying this, but as far as I'm concerned, for these purposes, for general purposes, non-repudiation is a bonus.
Oh, really? So you think
Yes.
It's just icing on the cake? It's just the fact that we got to get people sending encrypted emails to begin with, and then it's, okay, now we can start proving people are actually who they are sending those emails.
So non-repudiation is important for certain circumstances. So if I say, hey, Ryan, I'm going to be in your area in 3 weeks. Let's get together for lunch at 3 p.m. on Saturday, the whatever. That doesn't need non-repudiation, because the downside for you of showing up at X place for lunch and me not being there is relatively low. And relatively speaking, the odds are something came up.
True. Yeah.
And I just, for whatever reason, couldn't get there. And there are alternate channels to handle that. On the other hand, there may be circumstances where, hey, Brian, I'm working with you to create this, I don't know, we're creating a website that has a company behind it, and we're offering a service, and I need to send you these legal documents.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, the non-repudiation becomes very important, because if I'm sending them to you with a digital signature, it becomes far more important.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry.
but
I just had some irony. A new version of Mac GPG2 just came up on my screen to install. Okay.
So, but these are by far the minority of situations.
Okay.
And we can have. I really think that we could reasonably run into a situation where we could actually have a handful of these systems that pop up that are running off of for time systems. They're verified running off of multiple GPS sources. For their signatures, they have been generated using actual, not just pseudo-random number generators, but actual random number generators, like the old Citrix chips used to have.
Okay.
I wish I remember what the chip
I thought that was
model
like perpetual machine. I thought that was like perpetual motion machine. You can't really have.
No. Okay, so the last couple of models of the Citrix chips had they basically had a system where they could pull random number generators from quantum fluctuations based on thermal transfers. You can look this up on Wikipedia. I'm not making this stuff up.
I will definitely look that up.
Yes. So, but with these kind of validations, it becomes a stronger confirmation when they sign things.
Mm-hmm.
So, in order for the non-repudiation to happen, you need more than just the sender and the recipient. You need somebody else who can validate that the transfer happened at X time, and you need that independent party to sign things.
Okay.
Like
an escrow service, you've got a third party saying that person has a
not escrow,
like
not
a notary,
escrow.
like a notary.
Yes.
But isn't that what a CA is? Lee, you had a point you were going to make earlier about the non-repudiation bit.
I have forgotten what my point was.
Oh, that's okay. Well, how do you feel about the non-repudiation? Do you think it's a big deal? Making sure that you are who you say you are, or whenever you're talking to a client, because.
Yeah, well, clients is slightly different. That's kind of closer to the contract situation because you may be offering advice or saying things where you are representing your company to them. So in that sense, I think it would be useful. But we're talking corporate, and it's almost legal there. But people talking amongst themselves, who are probably the vast majority of people who are doing unencrypted comms, I think those people, getting them on board doing any kind of encryption would be good at this point. And we're getting there. We're starting to see other things in other protocols. Like we mentioned Moxie earlier, and TechSecure has offered secure SMS messaging, encrypted SMS messaging. And Perio has just come about, which has got a load of crypto in it. And I think one of the largest problems that email has faced with encrypted comms is that it's not there by default. Like, everyone uses HTTPS, but they didn't have to go and install a module or anything. It's just your browser does HTTPS out the box. Yeah. Email clients, sure, they can make SSL collection to like SMTPS or IMAPS boxes, but none of them really have like GPG or anything built in. The closest is, a bunch of them have S-MIME, but that still requires that you go and go get an S-MIME cert and set it up. Nothing is like a browser in HTTPS where you install it, it's there, it just does its thing. I think if we had that, then people would be on board with encryption. But like my man is not going to go install anything.
So with S-MIME, you actually have to go the different route. You have to become a CA yourself and then get trusted by an intermediate CA. So you have to have a cert signed by, say, Thought or one of the other, third-party CAs.
And then you use that certificate to encrypt or sign your email.
Yeah. So it's actually more complicated than PGP. Anybody can get a PGP key. Anybody can make a PGP key.
They can, and the other thing is the S-MIME, of course, has the same problem that HTTPS does with compromised CAs and rogue certs and that sort of thing. But it probably has the more integrated, cleaner user experience for the average user because it's click the encryptee button or the signy button. There is not as much involved in that portion as there is with GPG.
So do you think with EFF's initiative to do basically free SSL certs for everybody in the future, that would be making S-MIME a more attractive solution for the laymen or for companies instead of using PGP?
I think a certain number of people it will. I mean, people who like it but they don't want to buy a cert or whatever, I think they'll get on. But I still don't think that fixes the my mum problem.
Yeah, I mean, do you trust how much are you going to trust the EFF if you didn't trust Thought or one of the other ones? I mean, how much are you going to trust them?
Plus, like my relatives are not going to sign up with the EFF either because they don't care about S-MIME certs. They're just not going to set it up unless it's there out the box, I think.
Yeah, and true. And they don't need to send a secure email if they're sending, I don't know, a recipe for cookies or, hey, how are the kids?
They are still, a lot of people, I think, of that generation are still of the, why do I need to encrypt if I have nothing to hide mentality.
Yeah, I understand. Well, gentlemen, I want to keep talking, but we're so god-awful over. This is a jumbo episode, and I didn't want to have a two-part episode, so this is going to be like an hour and a half long.
And only 4 topics.
I know. Well, these things were interesting to me, and maybe this is something we'll do more often with the news of the week. Maybe we'll just bring it down to 2. But before we go, I wanted to find out about what each of you are doing. I know Jarrod's got uber secret stuff he's doing, but he has a blog. You have a blog you're doing.
I do, right? At llamasinmynetwork.com.
That's all one word?
Yes.
Okay, and Llamas is spelled L-L-A-M-A-S.
L-L-A-M-A-S inmynetwork.com, and it's llamas, not llamas.
That's right. Do not go to alpacasinyournetwork.com. Totally different website. Oh my God.
No,
do not go to alpacas in our network. Chinchillas in our network. Do not go to that one either. That one's just awful.
No, both of them are kind of cheesy and just you don't want that.
Yeah, it's like a whitehouse.com, whitehouse.gov thing. Definitely don't want to go.
Actually, whitehouse.com I think now points to whitehouse.gov because the guy got all embarrassed when he had kids.
And as he should. And how can people find you on the tweets, on the Twitter space?
It is at Jarrod Frates. There's no .com there, but it's just at Jarrod Frates.
That's JARRODFRATES.
Yes, because when I signed into Twitter, I was too lame to actually pick a name.
That's okay. I didn't pick one either, so I don't have a cool hacker name.
Yeah, but you have a cool name though.
Whatever. You're just saying that because I invited you on and you want to come back later. So
not as far as you know.
So. Last but not least, Mr. Lee Brotherston, how will people find you on the internets and the Twitter space and the Facebooks and the
Twitters is Synack SYNACKPSE because I didn't think it through when I picked it. And blog.squarelemon.com is where I started doing a few bloggy things.
That's right. And you've got some developments with the Superfish and the Genius Box and what was that, Priv Dog? You've been working on some of that stuff, and you've got a talk that you're working on for that, which we were going to talk about, but we decided not to because.
There isn't. But the brief thing is that I found out that they leave fairly unique fingerprints in SSL in the pre-encrypted part of the SSL handshake, so you can start. I've put some snort signatures on GitHub, so you can actually detect boxes running those based on the SSL fingerprint.
Awesome.
Based on the cipher suites they use. Yeah.
And I am looking forward to your paper and your talk with bated breath on what you've learned on the outset of other things you've been working on. So
yeah, I'll keep you posted.
Absolutely, and we want to be the first people to hear about that on BreakSec. So. Mr. Boettcher can be found at BoettcherPwned, BoettcherPwned. I told him to make a smaller tweet handle because he's pretty much making up an entire tweet with just his handle, but he didn't get it. I am at Brian Break. We do have an official Twitter handle now. I just realized that that's something we probably should have. You can get us at BreakSec, BRAKESEC, or you can also use the hashtag BreakSec if you want to get a hold of us. That would be great. You can get us at email, bds.podcast@gmail.com. We have a Facebook page, facebook.com/breakingdownsec. We're on LinkedIn. You can tweet us up if you want to. We're pretty fastidious about our tweeting. So that was great. You gentlemen can come back anytime. You know that. If you want to, come on and talk about more PGP stuff, I definitely will have you on. And again, congratulations, Jed, on your super secret squirrel stuff that we can't talk about. Maybe we'll talk about that the next time you come on. And that's been episode 12 for Breaking Down Security. I'm sorry, one last thing. iTunes. We need some iTunes reviews. So if you are a listener of the Breaking Down Security podcast, please hit us up on iTunes. We love the reviews, and Apple would like us to have reviews as well. So that's it. Episode 12 is in the can. Have a great week. We'll see you later.